Would you buy a house without signing a contract? Would you go into business with someone on just a handshake? Would you buy a car with the promise of a dealer to deliver that car and no signed agreement? I kind of think not. Welcome back to another episode of High Ticket Woman. I want to make a case for marriage today. We require contracts for every major life decision in our lives, right? Buying a home, taking out a loan, starting a job. But for some reason, when it comes to marriage, the most significant decision, we're going to make, or at least the most, significant physical decision we're going to make in our lives, right? Um, some people believe for whatever reason that a verbal promise is enough. Why is that? How have we gotten to that point where we can just go, "Oh, are we in a committed relationship? Yeah, we're in a committed relationship. Okay, great." Well, today we're talking about the value of marriage, why it's not a defunct institution at all, and why choosing that lifelong commitment without a legal and a spiritual covenant can really leave you vulnerable and unprotected. Okay, so obviously we've got to add God into the picture here, don't we? Because in reality, God created marriage. Marriage isn't just a piece of paper like some people say, right? And then they say, if it's just a piece of paper, why do I need the piece of paper? I guess for the same reason you need a piece of paper in all those other major life decisions, right? But no, it's more than just that. It's a covenant. It is a sacred bond designed by God, right? Again, you're going to hear me talk about Genesis 2:24 again. For this reason, a man is supposed to leave his husband, leave his father and his mother and be united to his wife, not girlfriend in a cohabitation, and they become one. So marriage is it's not just a human institution, a human tradition. It's something that God designed. Why? To set us apart for commitment, for unity, for partnership, but also as a serious binding agreement, not just a casual promise. God made covenants throughout the Bible, right? If you know your Bible, you know that he made a covenant with the Israelites in the Old Testament, and he made a new covenant with the New Testament church, right? So the covenants they they demonstrate a deep commitment and faithfulness that God has for his people. When we enter into marriage, it's the same thing. It's meant to reflect that divine commitment. Okay. It's not something that we do lightly or leave when it's no longer convenient for us. And ultimately, it's meant to be a reflection of the love that God has for his church, right? We know that by going to Ephesians 5, right? It's very, very clear. Paul talks about it as a mystery, but then he reveals the mystery, right? Marriage is a reflection of the relationship between Christ and the church. But you know what? Beyond that, there is huge practical and emotional value to marriage that isn't there in just cohabitating. All right. There are legal and financial benefits and protections to marriage. There's emotional security that you don't get from cohabitating. And there's opportunities for personal growth and development that come. Let's talk a little bit about each of those, okay? Legal and financial protection. Marriage actually gives you more rights than the cohabitating does not. There are automatic inheritance rights that come when you're a spouse that aren't in place when you aren't married. Did you know that? Okay. You have more decision-making power over medical situations and financial security in ways that an informal agreement between you guys don't guarantee. Now, people cohabitate thinking, and this is so silly to me, right? Like, we're gonna try this on for size. We're gonna move in together, and it's gonna be somehow easier if it doesn't work out between us to just, disentangle this. But is that really true? In 30 plus years of working with people who have cohabitated, that separation and dissolution of the relationship is just as painful and difficult and financially messy as a divorce, to be honest, because we've entangled so many things. Our relationships are intertwined. Our finances are often intertwined. Even when we have separate bank accounts, it's still difficult to separate that out and move on. Never mind the emotional devastation. A piece of paper may not protect you from a breakup, but not having a piece of paper doesn't protect you from it either, all right? So when 2 people stand before God and their families and their friends and the law, and they make a covenant, they are demonstrating a deeper level of commitment and trust. And that commitment to each other in front of all those people and in front of God, that adds a whole 'nother layer of stability to the relationship, as opposed to the let's see where this relationship is gonna go mindset, okay? That doesn't give you any stability at all because there's always the back door that you can just turn around and go out, right? Personal growth and development. How does that play out in a marriage? Well, marriage refines you in ways that you can't even imagine. If you're married, you totally know what I'm saying, right? It forces us because when I work with people who or even when I watch these reality shows, Love is Blind or whatnot, which sometimes I like to I'm curious about them, right? I'm sort of fascinated by these shows and like how people can make this decision to marry before they've even seen somebody. There's a couple out there, Love is Blind and Married at First Sight, and they're fascinating to me in some ways. There are things about the shows I don't like at all, and I'm not necessarily recommending them. But I think it's the therapist in me and the romantic in me that's sort of like drawn to like, how do people make those decisions? Okay. But when you watch those shows, it's really interesting because those people are talking as though marriage is this very, very serious step and they only want to do it once. They don't want a divorce. Maybe they've been the byproduct of a divorce and with their parents and they know how devastating that was to them as a child. They only wanna do this once, and they take it very seriously, and so sometimes they get to the altar, and they say, "No, I'm not ready. I'm not ready to decide to marry you," because it is a very serious thing. Marriage teaches you how to be patient. It teaches you about self-sacrifice and compromise and unconditional love. It forces you to step out of a very natural selfish state. That's sort of our human default, right? To be pretty self-absorbed and then learn to prioritize the well-being of somebody else and then bring children into it and it's compounded, right? So when things get hard in a cohabitation situation, again, there's the back door, right? Like this is getting hard, this is getting complicated. I don't want to do this anymore, this isn't working for me. But once we've married, we really stop and think about, "Hmm, do I really wanna throw this all away?" Now, again, some people say, "What does a legal document, how does that define love?" Okay, well, maybe the legal document itself doesn't define love, but the truth is that commitment requires action, the kind of commitment that marriage entails. So the written document is a tangible sign that you are serious about upholding your promises in the same way as when you make other major life decisions. And you definitely want that piece of paper to not only hold yourself accountable, but to hold that other person accountable too, right? Without that, without the binding nature of marriage, I mean, either of you can just again walk away more easily. Um, and and so the and we can have this sort of like serial monogamy going on, right? I'm with you and only you until it doesn't work out, and then I'm in another relationship, and we're committed, we're exclusive. We like these labels, right? Um, until it doesn't work out, and so on and so forth. So how many serious monogamous relationships have you been in and you're still going, right? I mean, you're still looking for the right person is what I mean. The data speaks for itself. Believe it or not, research actually backs this up. There have been studies that show that people who cohabitate before marriage have higher breakup rates and lower relationship satisfaction. Those are just the facts, people, okay? There are a lot of marriages that I mean, the statistics show that if marriages last more than 5 years, okay, um, they last longer than cohabitation relationships, right? More people who cohabitate are likely to split up and separate, especially in the first few years of living together. So, commitment really matters. I you can go out and do the research on your own. It's there. It's readily available for you to see. I want you also to think about the impact that this has on kids because if you come from a home of divorce, you know it doesn't matter what age that divorce happened in your family. You can be a young child, you can be a teenager, you can be an adult. It's devastating to have your parents split up. And the ramifications of this go on from more than just 1 or 2 generations, right? Children who, again, research shows children who are born to cohabitating couples, they're almost twice as likely to experience family breakups, okay, as opposed to those who are born into marriages. That's pretty darn significant. So that stability of marriage really provides a healthier environment for children and con contributes to their overall emotional and psychological well-being, something to really think about. Again, no, a piece of paper cannot guarantee that you're not gonna end up divorced, but it does make you stop and reflect on, "Is this something I really wanna walk away from and throw away because I've made this big ultimate commitment?" So, have I made a case? Because I believe and I know the Bible says marriage is a sacred, necessary commitment, not just a legal formality. That part is there, but it's not just that. And when you are married, that honoring that covenant that you've made before God and before each other carries huge weight, huge significance that ripples out and touches every aspect of your life. A God-centered marriage, okay? A faith-based marriage, a marriage that upholds the intentions of God, what it's supposed to be mirroring and reflecting is so key, and cohabitating doesn't even come close. Something to think about, something to reflect on. That's it for today's episode. I want you to reach out to me, share this with somebody that is trying to make the decision between cohabitating or marrying, somebody that is gonna benefit from this. I really appreciate you tuning in with me every week. I'm actually gonna start putting out a couple episodes a week, so be watching for that, not just once a week. We're gonna bump it up to 2 starting, well, I think probably by the time this airs, we will already be putting out 2 episodes, so be sure to tune in. In the meantime, stay committed. Stay faithful. If you're married already, stay committed and faithful to your partner. If you're struggling with that, reach out to me, debbiecaudle.com. Free phone call. Doesn't cost you a dime to just sit and chat with me and tell me what's going on. And you can always come join my private Facebook group, Relationship Resolution. Okay. Because I tell you all the time, I go live in there every 2 weeks. I answer your questions that you send to me privately. That's free. That's free coaching, everybody. So, that's a big deal. Okay. I'll see you next week. I love having you here. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye, everybody.